Thank you so much, Keith. I've seen that, as Keith and Barbie were my pastors, Keith's jokes have not improved. So I will pray for you, and, you can suffer for Jesus here in Reading, it's fine. But it is so lovely to be here, and Keith and Barbie were my pastors, and they're also my friends, so you're very fortunate to have people that care so much. My story was a couple of years ago, I was sitting in my office, and I've written loads of books, actually, and I was looking at all my Christian books, and like most Christian leaders, I have hundreds and hundreds of Christian books, and I was thinking to myself, oh my goodness, I don't have one book that I would give to a non-Christian. Not one. I have some that say they're evangelistic and they're non-Christian friendly, and when I read them, they're actually quite full of jargon. And they always wanted to get someone to a decision at the end. And, I get it. Those books are necessary and needed. But I also had a breakdown about 9 years ago. You're going to get a lot of honesty from me today. I hope that's okay with you guys. And when I had my breakdown, everyone was trying to give me a book to read. I couldn't even read a paragraph, not alone a book. So I suddenly started to think, what would it look like to write something that's actually targeted at the dads that I watched my son play football with, or the mums at the school gates, or people that I work with who don't have a faith. It mentions faith. I don't want it to be like some books where you have to really, 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 really search for it. I want it to mention faith, but I wanted it to be gentle and kind, and talk about mental, emotional, and spiritual health. And so I started writing in a completely different way. I started writing in short stories and poems and tools and practical things. And we started putting these books out into the world. And then Penguin, which happened to be the world's biggest publisher, apparently, said, we are sensing what's going on in the church, and we are going to start a Christian imprint called Ebury Vine, which is incredible, isn't it? When the biggest publisher in the world goes, we're recognizing that the church has something to say. And they said, we would love you to be the first ever UK Christian author. No pressure. And I could muck it up for every other author out there. And so we started putting these different types of books out into the world. And I've just been humbled by the response. A head teacher rang me up and said, I'll take 100 copies, please. And I was like, wow, that's a lot of copies. This is a good start. And I said, why are you taking 100? And they said, because they're in Year 11. Year 11, they've had 3 attempted overdoses in Year 11. And she said to me, to be honest, Patrick, it's not the kids we're worried about, it's the parents. Parents don't know how to talk to their kids about mental and emotional health. Whose parent talks to them really, really brilliantly about mental health? There's like 2 people. That's really encouraging. And I did this last night, and both my kids put my hand up, and I was like, thank God. Which was really nice. I hadn't even planned that. But they said, what we'd love you to do is we'd love you to come into school and talk to the whole of Year 11 and the whole of Year 11's parents, and we'll disguise it as an awards evening. So I gave out loads of certificates. It was great. And about 500 people in the room listening to what I had to say about mental and emotional health. I then found out the books are being given out in chemo and radiotherapy units in hospitals in different places in the country. I found out that churches were buying them and leaving them in cafes and on buses. Prisons were buying hundreds of them and inviting me in. I've got a friend called Nina Hussain who reads ITV News. She reads it every lunchtime apart from Friday, because Fridays we're in prison together. We were in Peterborough prison this Friday. And it's just been incredibly moving. When I go into women's prisons, they often give me little notes, the women, as I leave, on receipts and stuff like that. They're so sweet. And one note they gave me recently was, thank you, Patrick, for the book. I just want you to know it's been like a friend in my cell. And I just think that's so beautiful. And so we've got a vision of really wanting to try and get these places in community. So we're starting something called the Big Community Read. And the Big Community Read is we are basically going to start book clubs everywhere. Coffee shops, libraries, leisure centres, people's homes. It's a free project, free videos, free resources, and you can get involved. And the book we're doing it with is called Small Steps of Big Change, and it's just come out with Penguin, a guide through overwhelm. When I ask people, how do they feel about society now? the most common response I get is I just feel overwhelmed. I see the stuff on the news, it's overwhelming. Stuff going on with my kids and my personal life and AI and all the other stuff I'm going through with my own health, it's overwhelming. And so I'd love you to get a copy of this for yourself, of course I would. But what I'd really love more than anything else is to get a copy for someone you know who's struggling and who's not of faith, or can be of faith, but they'll get something out of it, but mainly not of faith. And I'll sign it for them. Not because I'm into signing books, but just because I think sometimes it's really precious to get a book that's signed by the author, and I'll try and write a little encouraging note in there as well. One woman took 100, and I said, that's a lot of copies. Why are you taking 100? And she said, my 15-year-old son died by suicide 3 weeks ago. So what I'm going to do is, at the funeral service, everyone's going to get a copy of the book with an order of service, and I'm going to talk about hope. And just before Christmas, she rang me up and she said, I've got 25 of them coming for Christmas dinner. Will you come and give a talk? I was like, oh no. It's one of those invitations you can't really say no to. And I did. It was one of the hardest talks I've ever done. But it was so good to do. And I'm just amazed that God is opening all these doors. So please pray for us. We really, really need it at the moment. Just some really unusual things happening. And then we're going on this tour. And we're in Egan, which I think is not a million miles away from here. It's probably just over half an hour. And again, we want to put on events that you could bring anyone from any background, from any cultural background, from any faith background. And they'll laugh, they might cry a little bit, but they'll hear some brilliant music. And we're doing it with local communities. So there'll be loads of local charities there, loads of local people engaged in different things. So if you want to come to that, you are so welcome. Anyone can relate to this slide? Put your hand up. Oh, that's a bit of a more encouraging response. You know, it's true, isn't it? Life isn't always easy. And sometimes it can be really, really tough. I want to tell you a story about two gentlemen. One of them you've probably heard of. This name was Billy Graham. Anyone heard of Billy Graham? Billy Graham is probably one of the most famous, well-known evangelicals to live, really. And an interviewer went up to Billy Graham and said, Billy, what has been the highlight of your life? And he sort of expected that Billy Graham, statistically, has spoken to more people about Jesus than most people alive at the time. He's filled football stadiums. I'm sure there may even be people here that got saved under Billy Graham. And so he thought maybe it would be that. Maybe that would be the highlight of his life. Or maybe it would be all the TV stuff he did and, you know, the fact that it went into all these different nations. Maybe that would be. Billy Graham's met virtually every president and could go into the White House at any time. Maybe that would be the highlight of his life. Billy Graham said this, the highlight of my life has been just getting to know Jesus. Loving Jesus and knowing that Jesus loves me. There was another guy. His name was Chuck Templeton. Chuck Templeton was an equally brilliant communicator. Some say even better than Billy Graham. He spoke in platforms across North America. But Chuck Templeton had a problem. When suffering hit his life and he saw suffering around him, he just couldn't reconcile it with his faith. So he renounced his faith. And he famously wrote this book called Farewell to God. The interviewer went up to Chuck Templeton and said, do you regret doing that? And he vigorously defended all the reasons that he'd renounced his faith because of the pain and the suffering and the trauma that he'd seen in the world. And then they got on to talking about the person of Jesus. Chuck Templeton said, Jesus was the most inspirational person and most important persons that ever walked this planet. And then his bottom lip started to quiver and he said, I miss him. I miss him. And you know, some days I worry I might end up like Chuck Templeton. And I know Christian speakers don't normally say that on platforms, but I've traveled around the world and I've spoken to mothers whose kids have been stabbed and killed in London. And I've been to funerals of young children. I've dealt with situations where kids have been emotionally, physically, sexually abused by adults who are meant to take care of them. I've held children in my arms that later have died from a preventable disease because they live in countries where there's so much poverty, where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and just simple medicines are not available to them. I've had tragedy in my own life, and yet I struggle sometimes. How do we deal with this stuff. And so today is a really practical, how do we deal with pain in our lives? Because we all go through pain, right? We all go through grief. We all go through difficult times with our kids. That is universal. And the Bible offers us so much insight that we don't often talk about. The Psalms is where I want to go. The Psalms, 40% of the Psalms are laments, crying out to God, raw, gut-wrenching honesty. And the psalm I'm going to look at today is Psalm 13, which is a very familiar psalm and one of the easier laments to take on, actually, because some of them are pretty hard to take on. The context of this psalm is that David is hiding, likely to be from Saul, and he is experiencing deep sorrow and depression. He feels like God has hidden his face and forgotten him. A common experience when you're going through a tough time. He feels misunderstood, confused, anxious, bewildered, forgotten. And then he cries out to God these words. Imagine he's in the cave. And basically he'd have to leave the cave every now and again for food and rations. He's got his army with him that he's meant to be in charge of as well. He doesn't know the timing. We don't know if this was weeks, months, could be years, waiting for God to do something. And he cries out, "How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes while I sleep in death. And God and my enemy will say, I've overcome him, but my foes will rejoice when I fall. But I'm going to trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he's been good to me." I just think that this is so unbelievably honest. And I feel like we need more honesty in church. Do you? And, Graham Kendrick, some of you would have heard of. I actually came here with Graham Kendrick. Graham Kendrick probably, arguably, is one of the most influential singer-songwriters. I think when church history is written, Graham Kendrick's name about this period will probably be in it. He wrote the song Shine, Jesus, Shine, and loads of other songs. And we talk a lot about worship songs. And we say it's really interesting that 40% of the Psalms are laments. That not even close is that to modern day worship songs. Not even close. And they're good tunes, but lack theological depth a lot of the time. And actually, it's a little bit unbalanced because the Psalms is where we get to deal with our pain. It's where we can ask why, how long, who, what's going on. It's raw. Psalm 10 verse 1 says, "Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble?" Psalm 42 verse 9 says, "Why have you forgotten me?" And then you can actually go throughout the New Testament. One of my favorite stories in Mark 9 verse 24, a father seeking help and healing for his son says to Jesus, "I believe, help my unbelief." I feel like that sums my life up. I believe, God, I do, but please help my unbelief. Jesus laments, doesn't he? In the Garden of Gethsemane, he laments on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Paul, in 2 Corinthians 11, verse 22, he tells everyone what it's really, really like. What it's like to preach the gospel. He says, I just want to let you know how well it's going. I've been flogged, lashed, shipwrecked, exposed to death, hungry, thirsted, naked, and cold. Imagine a charity newsletter coming out like that, from the church. I just want you all to know everything is a complete and utter disaster. Please give me money. It doesn't really work, does it? We want to tell the good stories all the time. But the point to this is this. Look at what he says in the third word. How long, Lord? Even in his pain, he's calling God Lord. You're still Lord. And I'm going to acknowledge who you are, even in my pain. Who remembers the cartoon character Charlie Brown? Anyone remember Charlie Brown? Charlie Brown says there's two types of people in life, okay? You've got a big boat and you get your deck chair out. There's the people in life that put their deck chair at the front of the boat and you're always thinking about where you're going next. What's the vision? Where you're going? Where's the destination? And he said the other type of person in life is the person that puts the deck chair at the back. You're always talking about the good old days and things that happened in the past. Charlie Brown goes, Flipping heck, I can't even get the deck chair open. I feel like sometimes I'm a little bit like Charlie Brown. Walter Brueggemann said this: churches should be the most honest place in town, not always the happiest place in town. Interesting. So the second part, he's crying out to God in his pain. And this is where the sort of prayer comes. He's starting to say, God, please look on me. Answer, Lord my God, again. Give light to my eyes while I sleep in death, and my enemies will say I've overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. It's interesting, isn't it, that I don't understand why, but it feels like God doesn't answer all the why questions. You know, when someone dies, don't you say, well, why couldn't they lived a little bit longer? They had stuff to give. They had stuff to... Why? When Jesus went to Lazarus' tomb, you know what happened? Shortest verse in the Bible. What does it say? Jesus wept. Why did he weep? Surely he's the Son of God. He knew that he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. There's no need for tears. Maybe it was something about the way you respond to pain. Maybe it was something about the pain of the people around him, his friends that are weeping, that are heartbroken. He shared in their pain. You see, what laments do, they get us away from Christian platitudes. And the world doesn't need Christian platitudes. They don't need us to silver line everything. Sometimes, I guess, most people in this room, we will go through what I call the Tetris moment. Does anyone remember the game Tetris? And where these blocks, they fall out of the sky, and you try and give them in a straight line, and then the straight line comes, and then it disappears, and then you just keep going. And the blocks come faster and faster and faster and faster, and eventually you just can't get them in a straight line, and it's game over. This person was rubbish at Tetris, on the way. And, but for me, it happened all those years ago when my daughter Kezia got really sick with HSP. Abby, our other little daughter, Precious, she's just been on mission with Elim in Estonia. She has a condition called nystagmus. She's 40% vision with ADHD and autism in there as well. Dad got cancer. He was in hospital for 9 weeks, 4 different operations. He was meant to be in for a week. I was dealing with fundraising crisis after fundraising crisis at work, as you do with charities. Diane had a miscarriage. It was like, oh my goodness, it's all coming down, you know. And then I got diagnosed with a degenerative knee condition, which means I get both my legs broken in 3 places. And I have to have a big external frame put around my leg as a picture of my leg. And these frames are on 6 to 18 months. And it's quite hard when you've got a massive frame around your leg because you can't really hide it. And you feel very, very self-conscious. And being quite well known within this tiny Christian bubble, everyone wanted to pray for me for healing, you know. And don't get me wrong, I believe in healing. But when I wasn't healed, people told me, you know why you weren't healed? Because you didn't have enough faith. And then they told me, you know, Christian leaders are the worst to pray for because you're rubbish at receiving. God's backed you into a corner. That's really nice of you, God, to do that. Thank you very much. God's going to help you have this time to learn how to finally rest. Just think of all the time you're going to have on your hands to pray when you're in complete agony. You have got a hidden sin in your life that you need to repent of. Do you know what? I thought of every sin that I've ever done in my life, and I repented of it. I even made some up, to be sure. And you know what? I didn't need that. I just needed people to come alongside and love me. Because actually what pain does, if you think about pain, it's our body's signal telling us there's something wrong, isn't it? Without pain, it's actually quite dangerous, right? Because we wouldn't know there's something wrong. So pain is telling us there's something wrong. And actually, Keith and Barbie, they used to come around my house once a week and just sit with me. I thought they were going to give me a nice little sort of pep talk preach. Barbie was on her phone playing games. Keith was there like just chatting away about football. And that's all I needed. I just needed people to show a little bit of empathy. I think this next video I'm going to show you is one of the most brilliant videos. The amount of content that's in this next 2 minutes is incredible. Just check this out.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do.
Huh.
Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here. And you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
You know, it's so interesting, isn't it, that Brené Brown, actually, who does have a faith, who's one of the world's most respected psychologists, says, rarely does a response make something better. What makes something better is connection. And what did she call that space? She called it a sacred space, where you come alongside someone, and that's what we need to do. You remember Keith saying to me, sometimes people say God's fingerprints are all over this, but it feels like sometimes that God wears gloves. You can't always see what's going on. The point of lamenting is to name the injustice, her anger. Lament empowers sufferers to speak for themselves. Naming suffering before God reclaims human dignity and power that's been trampled on and violated. Laments are the beginning of action, a rejection or passivity, so we can invert despair. So what lament actually does, it gets us out of despair because we start to name the injustice. It's interesting. I have 4 children, and after our 3rd child, Diane really, really wanted another kid. And up to this point, we haven't had a cesarean. Well, I've never had a cesarean, actually. And so 4th kid comes along, cesarean. Diane loses 2.8 litres of blood in the operation. So she's in the high dependency unit. And I'm done now at this point. This was like the final straw. Do you know what I mean? When it hits the person you love the most, I'm like, that's it, I'm done. And I remember I was in King's College Hospital in Denmark Hill in South London. And opposite Denmark King's College Hospital in South London is the training quarters for the Salvation Army. So at 5:30 in the morning, I am lamenting. I'm going, God, I just don't get this. It's complete pitch black. And I go to the window and I take this photograph. It's the training quarters of the international training quarters of the Salvation Army. And the truth hit me again. Why would God allow his only son to die the most painful, horrendous death for us, only to leave me in my time of need? Why would he show the ultimate act of sacrifice? And here's the key thing. God's silence doesn't mean God's absence. God's silence doesn't always mean God's absence. One of the most beautiful verses in Isaiah 53 verse 3 says, Jesus was man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. That's an incredible description, isn't it? I never hear that preached on the way. Jesus is man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. Rowan Williams, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, talks about holiness. And he says, holiness in the Old Testament was very much about becoming pure, becoming separate, coming away. But he said the holiest place in the New Testament was the cross, which was almost like an execution machine outside Jerusalem on a hill where people's bodies used to get taken down and then dumped there. Holiness in the New Testament is a matter of Jesus going right into the middle of the mess and the suffering nature. For him, being holy is being absolutely involved, not absolutely separated. And so when we come to God with our pain, he gets it. One big response to pain is anger. I see this in young people all the time. In fact, I see it in many people all the time. We just don't want to admit it because anger is a sign of injustice. It's an emotional response to pain. It's a little bit like if you've ever got a light on the dashboard of your car, what do you do when you see a light on the dashboard of your car? I can guarantee that some of you will do this. Oh, look, there's a light on the dashboard of my car. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to ignore it, and it's going to go away all by itself. Anyone do that? And then, hopefully, it will suddenly just fix itself. And then the next day, you put the car on, you put the ignition on, and it's not there. And you're like, hallelujah, Jesus, thank you so much. You've healed the car. You go around the corner and bing, it's there again. The reality is, probably, at some point, if you don't take it into the garage, it's going to break the car. Anger is like that. It's a warning sign. It's saying something's wrong. It's not wrong. In fact, in Ecclesiastes, it says, allow anger to be a visitor, but not a resident. Great wisdom there. Allow anger to be a visitor, but not and that's what we're doing. We're lamenting. If we don't talk about emotions, guys, seriously, we have got the highest suicide rate in the whole of the country. Suicide kills more young men than cancer. Why? Because we've been brought up to say men don't cry, we don't share our emotions, we suppress them, we put them down, and then suddenly something gets too much, and then people come to our funerals and go, I had no idea that he was struggling. We can't keep on like this. It's literally killing us. We numb, we freeze, we go into denial. We can absorb other people's pain. That empathy is not standing in someone else's shoes, Brené Brown says that. Empathy is believing what it's like when someone tells you about what it's like to be in their shoes. Because they've got different DNA, they've got different history. She was saying in the video, it's about getting in touch with when you felt that feeling so you can relate to someone. But let's not pretend that we understand, but we can come alongside and listen. If you don't lament properly, you won't forgive properly. Just let that land a second, let you think. If you don't lament properly, it's hard to forgive properly. Because that is what the model that Jesus sets us, that God sets us. Lament is treating your pain with dignity. And then we get to this last bit. And, the reason I chose this psalm was because this psalm does get to a place where he says, God, I'm trusting in you again. Some of the psalms don't get there. That's a harder preach. So I avoid that. But you know what? Some psalms don't get there. But this one does. He says, but I will trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord your praise. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. Who knows that sometimes, if we're honest, trusting in God is quite hard. There was a Mother Teresa, the famous Albanian nun. A gentleman went up to her and said, Mother Teresa, will you pray for me? And she said, of course I'll pray for you. What do you want prayer for? And he said, I want prayer for clarity. How many times have we asked prayer for clarity? And Mother Teresa went, no, not praying for that. And he was like, oh, you've always seemed to have clarity, Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa said this, I've never had clarity about anything that I've ever done. All I've ever had is trust. So I'm going to pray that you will be able to trust. In this book, Small Steps of Big Change, there's this really gentle piece right in the middle that talks about creating space. The book talks about starting small, creating space, and thinking differently. And I talk about creating space for spirituality. You put it in a language that hopefully people outside the church would understand. And I tell lots of stories. I feel like Jesus told stories. It's okay to tell stories. Parables about fishing and farming, normally, because that's what people could relate to. And one of the stories I tell is of this lady called Katie Piper. Has anyone heard of Katie Piper? Katie Piper was a model. She was sexually assaulted, and then the person assaulted her arranged for someone to throw acid in her face. She's had so many operations. She's had 400 different surgeries. Katie Piper said about faith this.
I found Christianity in my 20s. If you find something bigger than you, it's very comforting. I had a lot of post-traumatic stress. I was always in like fight or flight.
Yes.
So it was difficult.
How did you deal with that?
Taking it one day at a time, and a deep, deep belief for there is more beyond this, and like there is life, and I've lived for a reason. And I did feel bigger than what tried to hurt me very early on. I knew I wasn't going to be the same again. And I think it was having such a full life when I was young. I was like, I really did that to death. Like, thank God for that chapter. Here's the new chapter. Here's the new me. And I was like curious, I suppose, curious to see what God had in store.
Did you have faith then already? Or was faith something that happened after?
No, it happened during, when I was an inpatient. You search for something bigger than you. And that's kind of like a quest for a meaning. Because if we always think we're the biggest thing, like it's kind of like a level of narcissism, right? If you find something bigger than you, it's very comforting.
Are you looking for the rest of this conversation?
No, we're
Just
not. No,
search,
it's
begin
fine.
again.
There was an artist, and there's a gentleman, and he wanted to commission a picture of peace. And so what he did is he got this very famous person who was an artist and said, go and paint me peace. And so the artist came back, and he had painted a beautiful country scene. Clouds, hills, nice little village church, sheep running around. And he went, there you go, there's peace. And the commissioning man said, no, that's not peace, try again. So he went away again. And this time he painted a mother holding a sleeping baby, the best sort of babies. Looking at her baby, just lovingly, just gazing. He went, look at that. That's peace. He went, no, that's not peace. Try again. So this time, he painted this picture. He painted a stormy sea beating across the cliff. The sky held dark rain, clouds, streaks of lightning, while there's waves churning below. The wealthy man was confused at first. And then he saw it. Tucked under, in the cliff edge, was a tiny little bird. Asleep. Within the storm, the bird was asleep. And he went, that's peace. I have this thing called tinnitus. I don't know if anyone's heard of it. You have this really annoying ringing in your ears. And it's all good, but at night time it's really annoying. And so I have one of these sleep masks, which freak the kids out when I go to the toilet in the middle of the night. And but every single night now, I listen to waves hitting the cliff edge and lightning, and I think of that bird asleep in the storm. I'm like, God, whatever I go through, I want to be knowing that you are there and you are holding me. In the Psalms, we get a language for our pain. In the Psalms, we know that God can handle our honesty. In the Psalms, we know that he gives us dignity. In the Psalms, we know that we can find our place and realize maybe we won't get the why questions, and that's okay. I want to show you this video. This is just a beautiful video. So often our worship songs are about ascending to the hill of the Lord. Have you ever thought about that? When you go up, if anyone's ever been up a mountain, anyone climbed right up the mountain? When you got up the top, were some of you just in cloud? And you think, why the heck did I climb all this way? I said to my wife, when we get to the top of the mountain, it's going to be like a worshipful experience. You're going to break into Shine, Jesus, Shine. And all I got all the way up going, flipping worship experience. I'll give him worship experience. I'm dying here. And actually, when you get to the top, there's just some moody goats, isn't it, who are trying to nick your lunch. Everything grows in the valley. Everything grows in the valley. At the top, there's some moody goats and a lot of cloud. And occasionally, it vanishes and you do get an amazing, amazing thing. But you know what? Actually, the Bible is all about God meeting us in the tough place. Though I go through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil. This is one of the most beautiful songs I think I've listened to in modern years. So check it out. I'm going to read you a poem and then I'm going to pray.
I found Christianity.
If you were to go down off the coast of Italy, off the coast of Portofino, in the Mediterranean Sea, if you were to go and swim to a certain place, you'd find a very interesting sculpture. And it's a sculpture by an Italian sculptor named Guido Giletti. And the sculpture is a full-sized sculpture of Jesus Christ. His arm is raised up in the air. But rather than displaying this sculpture in a museum or in a church or in a promenade, this sculpture is installed at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. And the only way to see it is to swim down, down, down. And the further you go down, the closer you'll be to seeing Jesus looking up and reaching upward to us. And while there are many songs that give voice to what it is to ascend to the hill of the Lord, to find Jesus at the heights, the Bible also tells us that when we go down to the depths, that he is already there. And so we want to share this song with you. It's called Christ is Lower Still.
Reach out, touch the hem of your garment now. Help me, heal me, my mind, my body and soul. Let the King descend, living right, make flesh. Lift this heavy heart to your throne, oh God. In your wounds I find room for all of mine. When from grace I fell, Christ was lower still. Humbly, lowly, Jesus waits in the valley. My Savior suffers with me. With him I'll rise again. Oh yeah, let the King descend. Living word made flesh, lift this heavy heart to your throne, oh God. In your wounds I find room for all of mine. When from grace I fell, Christ was lower. Let the King descend. Living word made flesh, lift this heavy heart to your throne, oh God. In your wounds I find room for all of mine. When from grace I fell, Christ was lower till the earth is still. Christ is lower still. We lift it all up to you. 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 We lift it all up to you.
We lift our hands, we lift our hands.
We lift it all up to you, Lord.
We lift our dreams, we lift our plans.
We lift it all up to you, Lord.
Jesus.
We lift our sorrow and our. We lift
Let's join in if you can. Just sing the words on our screen.
on you again. We cast our cares on you again. We lift it all up
If you're able, let's stand together. Stay standing if you can. I'd love to invite the worship band back. I'm going to read you a poem, and this is a really special poem to me. It's a poem that's based on a text found scrawled on a cell wall in Cologne, Germany in 1943. It's believed to be written by a child hiding from the Nazis. Just imagine that. And it says this: I believe in the sun, even when it's not shining. And I believe in love, even when there's no one there. And I believe in God, even when he's silent. And I believe through any trial, there's always a way. But sometimes in this suffering and hopeless despair, my heart cries for shelter to know someone's there. But a voice raises within me saying, hold on, my child. I'll give you strength. I'll give you hope. Just stay a while. I believe in the sun, even when it's not shining. Holy Spirit, we thank you for your presence here. I thank you for every single person here, Lord God. I thank you that you know their history, you know their thoughts, you know their kids' lives, you know kids who are going on with you, kids who maybe not going on with you. You know it, you get it. You understand the anxiety, the pain. You understand where diagnoses have come back not the way we wanted them to come back. You understand some of the aches and pains and the stuff that we've been through that's hit us left field. You get it. And God, I just pray as we worship you that you'd come, that you are Emmanuel, God with us. God with us in the depths. God with us in the heights. We can't get away from you, God. And so God, we pray. We love you. We love you so much. And we acknowledge, even in our pain, that you are our God. You are our God. We don't want to do platitudes. We want to do real. Jesus.